March 17, 1944. Bougainville Island, South Pacific. The jungle dawn arrived, not in silence but with a sound that Kazuo Tanaka had never heard in his 32 years, a mechanical roar so profound it seemed to shake the volcanic soil beneath his feet. He stood with 47 other prisoners behind a wire enclosure at the edge of what had once been impenetrable rainforest. 2 weeks since capture, 2 weeks of adequate food that still unsettled him. 2 weeks of watching American forces transform the landscape with a speed that defied comprehension. But nothing had prepared him for what emerged from the morning mist. The machine was yellow, massive, its blade wider than 3 men lying end to end. It advanced toward a stand of ironwood trees that would have required a full company of Imperial engineers weeks to clear by hand. The driver, a stocky man in oil-stained coveralls, sat high in an enclosed cabin, one hand on a series of levers. Tanaka watched the blade meet the first tree. The ironwood, thick as a temple column, held for perhaps 3 seconds. Then it shuddered, cracked, and toppled with a groan that echoed across the construction site. The machine did not pause. It pivoted, attacked the next tree and the next. In the time it took Tanaka to count to 100, 6 trees lay horizontal, their root systems exposed like severed arteries. Beside him, Sergeant Hiroshi Yamada whispered in disbelief. "This is not possible." But it was happening. The machine the Americans called a bulldozer moved through the forest like a blade through water. Behind it, other machines followed, graders, scrapers, trucks carrying loads that would have required entire labor battalions to move manually. Tanaka had commanded an engineering platoon in Manchuria. He understood the mathematics of construction, the man-hours required to build roads, airstrips, fortifications. What he was witnessing violated every calculation he had ever made. Lieutenant Sato, standing at the fence's far end, had his hands wrapped around the wire, knuckles white. He had been captured at Guadalcanal, had spent 6 months in this camp. "They do this everywhere," he said quietly. "Every island, every landing. The machines arrive before the infantry has finished securing the beachhead." The bulldozer completed its first pass, creating a clearing 60 meters wide in less than an hour. The blade rose, catching sunlight, and Tanaka noticed something that made his chest tighten. The machine showed no signs of strain, no overheating, no mechanical failure. It simply pivoted and began a second pass, widening the clearing with the same relentless efficiency. A young American guard approached the fence, canteen in hand. He was perhaps 20, with freckles and red hair that curled beneath his helmet. He had been kind to the prisoners, sharing cigarettes, attempting basic conversation. Now he followed Tanaka's gaze to the bulldozer and grinned. "That's a D8, he said, words slow and simple. Cat D8, built by Caterpillar in Illinois." He paused, searching for simpler words. "One machine, work of many men, maybe 500 men." The number hung in the humid air. 500 men. Tanaka had lost 500 men to malaria, starvation, and combat across 2 years in the Pacific. 500 men represented his entire battalion at full strength, and this single machine, operated by one man in stained coveralls, could accomplish their labor in a fraction of the time. Yamada turned away from the fence, his face ashen. He had been a farmer before conscription, understood the intimate relationship between labor and land. "How many of these machines do they have?" The young guard seemed to understand the question's essence. He laughed, not cruelly, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of the question. "Many," he said. He gestured vaguely toward the beach, where supply ships were even now unloading more equipment. "Many, many." By midday, 3 bulldozers worked in concert. The clearing expanded to accommodate what the prisoners now recognized as an airstrip foundation. Tanaka stood in the mess area, his metal tray holding more food than he had seen in a month before capture, and calculated. If 3 machines could clear 200 meters in a morning, and if the Americans had dozens of such machines per island, and if they were operating simultaneously across how many islands, the mathematics became staggering, impossible. Yet he was watching it unfold with his own eyes. That afternoon brought new revelations. A machine arrived that broke rocks into gravel with mechanical jaws. Another spread the gravel in perfectly level layers. A roller, weighing more than Tanaka could estimate, compressed the surface until it resembled poured concrete. Men worked alongside the machines, but they were supervisors, technicians, coordinators. The machines did the labor. An older prisoner, a former professor named Takeshi Mori, approached Tanaka as they watched the construction. Mori had taught engineering at Kyoto University before the war, had designed bridges and harbors. His hands trembled as he held the fence wire. "I calculated yesterday," Mori said softly. "From what I have observed here in this single camp, The Americans are producing approximately 6 months of our total national industrial output every week." He paused, his voice barely audible. "This is just one camp, on one island, in a theater they consider secondary to Europe." The implications settled over Tanaka like physical weight. Every speech from Tokyo, every assurance that American industrial capacity was exaggerated, that the soft Western powers would collapse under determined assault, all of it crumbled like the ironwood trees before the bulldozer's blade. A whistle blew. The machines fell silent for the first time since dawn. The operators climbed down, pulled thermoses from metal lunchboxes, and sat in the shade to eat. Tanaka noticed they laughed, talked easily, showed no signs of exhaustion. The machines sat idle but undamaged, ready to resume the moment their operators returned. The young guard approached again, this time with a folded newspaper. He pointed to a photograph of another bulldozer, this one clearing rubble in Italy. The caption mentioned the Seabees, the naval construction battalions, units that could build a complete airfield in days rather than months. "Seabees," the guard said, tapping the photo. "Can do." He grinned at his own wordplay, clearly pleased with the unit's motto. But Tanaka saw beyond the wordplay. He saw the photograph's background, where dozens of similar machines worked in organized chaos. He saw the abundance of equipment, the casual attitude toward machinery that would have been priceless in the imperial forces. These machines were tools, not treasures, expendable, replaceable. That evening, as the tropical sun set over the construction site, the day's work became visible. What had been jungle at dawn was now a graded foundation stretching 400 meters. Electrical generators arrived on trucks, providing light for night shifts. The construction would continue through darkness. Yamada sat beside Tanaka in their barracks, a structure the Americans had erected in 2 days using prefabricated materials and power tools. "We were told America was weak," Yamada said, "that their people were soft, that they had no warrior spirit." Tanaka nodded slowly. He had believed those assurances, had repeated them to his men, had accepted them as tactical reality when planning operations. Now he understood they had all been fighting blind, planning strategies based on fundamentally false assumptions about their enemy's capabilities. "They don't need warrior spirit," Tanaka replied. "They have machines." The next morning brought a delegation of Japanese officers captured months earlier in other campaigns, brought to Bougainville for interrogation and processing. Among them was Colonel Sato, formerly of the Imperial Engineers, a man Tanaka had met briefly in Manila. Sato had aged a decade in the months since. His uniform, once immaculate, hung loose on a frame diminished by captivity. But Sato's eyes were clear, no longer clouded by fever or malnutrition. He had regained 15 pounds in American custody. He walked without assistance. And when he saw the construction site, he stopped so abruptly his guards nearly collided with him. "You are seeing this for the first time," Sato said to Tanaka. It was not a question. "I have been watching for 4 months. It never becomes less shocking." They stood together at the fence as the bulldozers resumed their work. A 4th machine had arrived overnight, this one equipped with a different blade designed for finish grading. The operators coordinated through hand signals and whistles, moving in choreographed precision. "I commanded the construction of the airfield at Rabble," Sato said. "It took us 8 months using 1,200 men. We lost 300 to disease and accidents. The Americans will finish this one in 12 days, using 30 men and machines I cannot even name." He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, pages covered in sketches and calculations. "I have been documenting everything, the machines, the methods, the materials. I thought if I could understand their system I could find weaknesses, inefficiencies we could exploit." "And?" Tanaka asked. "There are none." Sato's voice was flat, drained of emotion. "Their system is not perfect, but it is so overwhelmingly superior that perfection is irrelevant. They have standardized every component. Any part fits any machine. Repairs take minutes because they have spare parts in abundance. If a machine breaks completely, they abandon it and bring another. They have more machines than they need." The bulldozer nearest them hit a boulder too large to push. The operator signaled, and within minutes, another machine arrived, this one with a crane attachment. The boulder, weighing perhaps 2 tons, rose into the air and moved to the clearing's edge as casually as a man tossing a pebble. Total time elapsed, 4 minutes. Professor Mori joined them, his engineer's eye cataloging every detail. "The crane machine," he said. "It is not specialized equipment. It is standard issue. They have dozens." The American lieutenant in charge of the construction site approached the fence, clipboard in hand. He was perhaps 30, with a calm competence that spoke of education and experience. He noticed the officer's attention and decided to make a statement. Through an interpreter, a Nisei soldier who spoke both languages fluently, he began to explain. This is a D8 bulldozer manufactured by Caterpillar, incorporated in Peoria, Illinois. We have approximately 3,000 of these units in the Pacific Theater. The crane is manufactured by Bussy in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. We have approximately 1,500. The grader is made by Alice Chalmers, also in Milwaukee. Production rate for all equipment types currently exceeds requirements. The interpreter delivered the information without emphasis, but each sentence landed like artillery. 3,000 bulldozers, 1,500 cranes, production exceeding requirements. How many units in total? Sato asked through the interpreter. The lieutenant consulted his clipboard. Naval construction battalions currently operate in the Pacific with approximately 12,000 major earth-moving machines, 20,000 vehicles, and support equipment I couldn't itemize in an hour. He paused, seeing their expressions. That's just the Navy. The Army has similar numbers, 12,000 machines. Tanaka tried to imagine the factories, the steel mills, the rubber plants, the training facilities, the supply chains necessary to support such numbers. His imagination failed. And in Europe? Mori asked. Larger deployment, the lieutenant said simply. Europe is the primary theater. The interpreter hesitated before delivering that last statement, understanding its devastating implication. The Pacific, where Japan had committed its entire military might, was secondary. The Americans were fighting on two fronts separated by hemispheres, and the Pacific received the smaller allocation. That afternoon, a gasoline truck arrived to refuel the machines. Tanaka watched the driver open valve after valve, fuel flowing freely. The Americans used gasoline like water. Each bulldozer consumed more fuel in a day than a Japanese patrol boat used in a week, and they had thousands of bulldozers. The young guard noticed Tanaka's attention. Oil from Texas, he said proudly, and California, and Oklahoma. Many states make oil. He seemed to search for words to convey scale. Very much oil. More than we can use. More than we can use. Tanaka remembered the fuel shortages that had crippled operations in the Philippines, the desperate fuel conservation measures. The operations canceled because aviation gasoline was unavailable, and America had more than it could use. As the day progressed, a pattern emerged that Tanaka began to recognize as distinctly American. When a problem arose, a machine bogged in mud, a drainage issue, a grade miscalculation, the response was immediate and overwhelming. More machines arrived, more men, more materials. They solved problems through abundance, through having enough resources to try multiple solutions simultaneously. There was no rationing of effort, no careful allocation of precious equipment. If 3 bulldozers might work, they sent 5. If a task might take 2 men, they assigned 4. Inefficient by Japanese standards, where scarcity demanded precision, but overwhelmingly effective when resources were effectively infinite. That evening, Yamada approached Tanaka with a question that had clearly been troubling him. When we return to Japan, if we return, what do we tell them? How do we explain this? Tanaka had no answer. How did you explain to people raised on rice and discipline, taught that spiritual strength could overcome material weakness, that their enemies possessed material strength beyond spiritual comprehension? How did you describe machines that did the work of 500 men to people who still relied on oxen for agriculture? We tell them the truth, Tanaka said finally, and we hope they listen before it is too late. But he knew it was already too late. The war was not being decided on battlefields alone. It was being decided in factories in Illinois and Wisconsin, in oil fields in Texas and Oklahoma, in 1,000 towns whose names he had never heard, producing more materials in a month than Japan could produce in a year. The 10th day after Tanaka's arrival, the airstrip achieved operational status. The graded surface received a coating of steel matting, laid in interlocking sections by crews working with practiced efficiency. That afternoon, the first aircraft landed a transport plane that taxied to a stop on a runway that had been jungled 10 days earlier. More planes followed. Fighters, bombers, reconnaissance aircraft. Within an hour, the hastily constructed airfield hosted more aircraft than Tanaka had seen in total during his deployment to Bougainville. And this was not unusual. The lieutenant mentioned casually that they were building similar strips on 3 other islands simultaneously. Colonel Sato stood beside Tanaka, watching planes land and depart with the regularity of a bus service. I wrote a report, Sato said quietly. Before I was captured, I wrote to Tokyo explaining what I had observed of American logistics. I detailed their construction capabilities, their material abundance, their systematic approach to warfare. What was the response? I was reprimanded for defeatist thinking, Sato said. Told that spiritual strength would overcome material advantage. Ordered to refocus on tactical victories rather than strategic impossibilities. He laughed bitterly. 3 months later, my position was overrun by forces using the techniques I had warned about. The airstrip became a hub of activity. Supply planes arrived hourly. The Seabees, having completed their primary objective ahead of schedule, began constructing support facilities, fuel depots, repair hangars, barracks, hospitals. The camp that had been an outpost became a base. The base would become a strong point. The strong point would support further advances, and somewhere, on other islands Tanaka would never see, other Seabee battalions were conducting similar transformations, creating infrastructure from wilderness, projecting American power across an ocean through the systematic application of industrial might. Professor Mori spent his evenings now in silence, no longer attempting calculations. The numbers had become meaningless. You could not calculate your way out of fighting an enemy who could build airfields in days, who had more machines than men, who treated equipment worth a fortune as disposable tools. On the 15th day, the young guard brought photographs from home, a farm in Iowa, vast fields of corn stretching to a flat horizon, mechanized harvesters, silos, trucks. The guard's father operated a farm that produced more grain than a Japanese village, using machines similar to the bulldozers now reshaping Bougainville. "My father sends food to army," the guard explained. "Corn, wheat, meat. Many farms send food, very much food." Tanaka understood then that the abundance he witnessed was not military exceptionalism. It was the baseline of American society. The machines, the excess, the casual waste, this was normal for them. They had not mobilized to abundance. They had mobilized from it. That realization carried a finality that mere military defeat did not. Japan had not simply chosen the wrong tactics or underestimated an enemy's resolve. It had challenged a nation whose normal peacetime existence represented industrial capacity beyond Japanese wartime mobilization. The two countries were not competitors. They were not even in the same category of industrial power. The war's outcome had never been in doubt. It had been decided by factors beyond courage or tactics or spiritual strength. Decided by factories and oil wells and farms, and the organizational capacity to transform raw materials into machines that did the work of 500 men. As the sun set on another day of construction, Tanaka watched the bulldozers line up in perfect rows, maintenance crews already swarming over them with tools and fluids and replacement parts. Tomorrow they would roar to life again, pushing back more jungle, creating more infrastructure, projecting more power. And on islands across the Pacific, in camps holding tens of thousands of Japanese prisoners, similar scenes were unfolding. Men raised on propaganda about Western weakness confronting daily evidence of strength so overwhelming it seemed like a natural force, inevitable and unstoppable as the tide. The final truth settled over Tanaka not as revelation but as acknowledgement of what he had known since that first morning. Watching the bulldozer fell ancient trees like grass. Japan had not lost a war. It had collided with industrial modernity and shattered against it. The result had been foreordained from the moment the first shot was fired. He thought of his men, still fighting on islands that would inevitably fall, still believing in promises about spiritual strength and tactical genius. He thought of the civilians at home, rationing everything, told their sacrifices would bring victory. He thought of the leaders in Tokyo, perhaps still believing they could negotiate a favorable peace. They were all wrong. Peace would come on American terms, dictated by nations that measured success not in soldiers' courage, but in bulldozers per square mile, in airfields constructed per week, in the tonnage of supplies that arrived daily without strain or shortage. The guard offered Tanaka a cigarette, American tobacco, plentiful and fresh. Tanaka accepted, noting even this small luxury revealed the same pattern. They had tobacco to spare. They had everything to spare. "War will end," the guard said, his simple English conveying complex meaning. "You go home, see family again." Tanaka nodded, hoping it was true, knowing that home, when he finally saw it again, would be transformed as profoundly as the jungle of Bougainville. Transformed not by bulldozers but by the realization that the world had changed, that industrial modernity had rendered obsolete every assumption about power and warfare that had guided Japanese strategy. The machines would shape that future as surely as they had shaped this airfield. Japan would rebuild, would learn, would adapt to a world where the work of 500 men could be accomplished by one machine and one operator with a steady hand. But first would come defeat, total and undeniable. First would come the bitter acknowledgement that courage alone could not move mountains, but bulldozers could. And America had thousands of them. If you have enjoyed the story, tell YouTube to send you more stories like this by subscribing to this channel, liking the video, and leaving a comment.